Alcatraz, the rock, a fortress against escape, but also a fortress designed to contain something far more insidious than flesh and blood: human misery. The official records speak of isolation cells, of cold, hard steel, and the chilling silence of the bay. But the deepest secrets of Alcatraz were not about keeping prisoners in, but about keeping the essence of their despair contained. Dr. Seraphina Vance was an acoustic historian, a niche profession dedicated to documenting the sonic history of historically significant, acoustically unique structures. Her focus was on the psychoacoustic impact of extreme isolation. She gained rare, specialized access to the decommissioned, lower levels of the notorious prison, guided by vague pre-closure schematics showing an undocumented anomaly beneath the main D block, the Acoustic Mitigation Chamber. The passage to the chamber was a long, cold descent through dripping concrete and corroded steel. Water pooled on the floor, thick with green mold and salt deposits from the bay. The deeper she went, the colder and heavier the air became, the silence less peaceful and more oppressive. She found the chamber beneath the old laundry facilities. It wasn't a block of cells. It was a single, heavily reinforced, strangely shaped concrete room, sealed by an unusually thick, almost vault-like steel door, marked only with the faint, faded number, 442. This was not a regular isolation cell. Inside, the cell was small, the walls lined floor to ceiling with bizarre, egg crate-like sound-dampening acoustic tiles. These were not the standard materials of the era. They were proprietary, designed to absorb and contain sound with almost impossible efficiency. The room was cold and empty, save for a single rusted steel slab bed. Seraphina set up her specialized equipment: infrasound sensors, acoustic mapping arrays, and psychoacoustic meters designed to detect frequencies below the human threshold of hearing. Her instruments immediately registered a signal. The room wasn't silent. It was saturated with a pervasive, oscillating infrasonic frequency. A sound below 20 Hz felt more as physical pressure than heard as sound. When Seraphina analyzed the pattern, her blood ran cold. The frequency was not random. It was a complex, continuous wave pattern that precisely matched the known neurological signature of suicidal despair and panic. The acoustic design of cell 442 hadn't contained noise. It had been engineered to trap residual human psychological distress, acoustically amplifying the concentrated suffering of every inmate ever held within Alcatraz's walls. The chamber was a living entity of auditory horror. Seraphina quickly realized the historical context. In the late 1940s, a secretive U.S. government program explored the use of infrasound for crowd control and psychological interrogation. The prison, already an ideal isolation environment, had been used as an experimental site. Cell 442 was their masterpiece. The acoustic tiles were not just for dampening. They were a resonant trap. Every scream, every sob, every grinding moment of psychological erosion felt by the inmates in the vicinity of D Block was collected, filtered, and compressed into this single, low, pervasive frequency within cell 442. Seraphina began experiencing immediate, profound physiological effects. Within minutes of setting up her gear, her heart rate dropped inexplicably, and a suffocating wave of despair washed over her. Not her own emotions, but a thick, imposed sense of hopelessness. She tried to focus on the objective data. Her instruments confirmed the horrific truth. The infrasound frequency was not decaying. It was accumulating. Every day, the prison had existed. Every minute of suffering had been stored here. She found the original project log of the lead acoustician, Dr. Thomas Kellner. His final entry, dated 1952, was chilling. The chamber is a success. We can contain despair. But the containment is not passive. It is active. The acoustic pressure requires energy, and it is now drawing on the ambient psychological energy of anyone near it to maintain the stored signature. It is a psychological vacuum. We must seal it. It is consuming the soul of the prison. Kellner had discovered that the chamber had crossed a threshold, evolving from a passive trap into an active accumulator. And now, Seraphina was its closest energy source. The despair began to manifest physically, bending reality around cell 442. A small antique glass jar of water Seraphina had placed on the floor to measure vibration began to react violently. The surface of the water vibrated not randomly, but in precise, rhythmic, concentric circles, indicating immense, focused low-frequency pressure. The air itself seemed to be solidifying under the psychological weight. The corrosion and decay of the corridor around 442 began to accelerate dramatically. Rust bloomed on the steel doors in seconds, not years. The green mold on the walls seemed to darken and expand, thriving on the negative, overwhelming emotional energy. Seraphina's own psychological state deteriorated rapidly. She was not herself. She was a vessel for the collective suffering of hundreds of murderers, thieves, and psychopaths. She started seeing things in the thick, oppressive shadows. Fleeting, gaunt figures, projections of the despair stored in the walls. She began to lose her memory of joy. Like Elias and the film frame, her mind was selectively purging her past, but the targets were her moments of happiness, love, and achievement. She could remember failure, fear, and pain with crystal clarity, but the memory of her wedding day became a hazy, cold abstraction. The chamber was clearing the positive space in her mind to make room for the overwhelming negative charge it projected. She found a piece of thick, knotted rope hanging from the cell's small window grate, a relic of a past suicide attempt. As she watched, the rope began to subtly unravel, its fibers violently separating as if all tension, all structure, was being systematically released by the surrounding psychological pressure. The chamber wasn't just influencing the mind. It was influencing the very structure of matter that represented hope or cohesion. Phase 3, the overload. Seraphina knew she had to leave, but the intense infrasound frequency was now causing profound vertigo and disorientation. She stumbled back into the corridor. The walls of the main D block were now actively sweating thick moisture, the air temperature dropping precipitously as the chamber intensified its draw on the surrounding thermal energy. She noticed the steel door of cell 442. The vault-like thickness was its only defense, but even it was beginning to buckle. The door was visibly bowing inward, warped by immense, unseen internal pressure from the sheer density of stored despair. Seraphina located the emergency power core, the chamber's original external energy source. Kellner's logs had suggested that an intentional energy overload might temporarily destabilize the acoustic field, forcing the accumulated despair to disperse violently, but harmlessly, into the atmosphere. With her last vestiges of cognitive clarity, fighting the overwhelming urge to simply lie down in the freezing water and cease existing, Seraphina activated the core. A violent surge of electrical power rushed through the ancient, corroded wires. Inside cell 442, the acoustic tiles began to explode off the walls, disintegrating into fine concrete dust as the trapped energy found its escape route. A chaotic, pulsing red light, the visual representation of the overloaded despair, filled the chamber, and a final, deafening infrasonic wave hit Seraphina, knocking her unconscious. Seraphina woke up hours later, outside the prison, having been evacuated by the team that monitored her. She was physically intact, but psychically devastated. The official report blamed an electrical fire and structural collapse in the lower levels. Cell 442 was sealed permanently. Seraphina never returned to acoustic history. She couldn't bear silence, and she couldn't bear noise. The immediate, overwhelming despair was gone. The overload had worked. The accumulated energy had dispersed into the atmosphere. But the field of the chamber had left an indelible mark on her. She noticed that every time she heard a sound, the laughter of children, the jingle of a bell, music, it was instantly, subtly, and terrifyingly muted by a high-frequency filter in her own mind. The positive sound was being actively neutralized. She could only hear pure acoustic despair beneath everything else. The chamber had not been destroyed. It had been transferred. Its function, its programming, the silencing of joy and the amplification of suffering, was now imprinted onto her neural pathways. She was the echo chamber. She was a living vessel for the residual acoustic horror of Alcatraz. She could no longer hear happiness. She could only hear the silent, eternal scream of Cell 442, trapped inside her own skull. The ultimate horror is not being isolated in a cell, but discovering that the cell is now isolated within you.